My name's John Fraze. I'm Senior Managing Director at Ankara, and I'm here with Dave Gilbertson, who's the Vice President at UKG. And we are doing part 2 of our video series talking about what's happening to the U.S. economy with a focus on labor. So the first video got a lot of attention, not just for my socks, but for the intelligent information you brought to the group.
In part.
In part, yes. And wanted to follow up. We made some predictions. We've now been through Labor Day and a lot of back to school, and the data's coming in. So one of the main points you made, I talked about religion and birth rates and marriage rates and household income and all these sort of scary topics. And you said something that I had not thought a ton about, which was childcare and healthcare concerns were a big issue about feeling like you could go back and participate in the workforce.
Yeah.
What are we seeing?
Yeah, so it's been fascinating to see how the media is talking about this topic, because I almost feel like they're describing this as workers out there being like the cranky old neighbor. Oh, kids these days, they don't want to work.
Right.
No, that's not it at all.
Yeah.
Kids these days are human, right?
Yep.
They've got family obligations. Childcare was a disaster during the pandemic. Like some days childcare was on, some days it's off, some days they just shut down. You just never know. And then kids were home last year for the most part, not around the country, but for the most part. So now all of a sudden, school starts, you know where they're going to be during the day. Great. That frees up, at least I know during this part of the day, my kids will be out, I'm not going to be responsible for them. Great, so that's number one. Number two is, if I go to work, I don't want to get sick. Just period. During a pandemic, that is much, much harder. And most of the hourly jobs out there are working with the general public. Not all of them, but a lot of them are working with the general public. That's a scary, scary proposition. If you've got, compromised family members at home that you're worried about. So healthcare concerns number 2. Looked like a couple months ago that was on the right trajectory, right? We're golden. We're out of this thing. This is pretty. Well, we kind of declared victory a little early there.
Yeah, and then Delta.
And then, exactly, then Delta comes along. So that's adding a bunch of uncertainty. And then the third thing I'll just touch on was that has also gotten a lot of play, but I think is very overblown, is these enhanced federal unemployment benefits, right? This is, again, people are saying, well, they just don't want to work because they're getting paid more to not work than they. Well, no, that's actually not the case, right?
Is there data to prove it, though, right?
We have data to prove that the states that got rid of federal unemployment benefits early actually underperformed the states that kept it until the end of the program.
Yep, and
So
there's a lot of variables in there, but what's interesting is that you can take the politics out of it here.
Yes, 100%.
When you look at the data, and I know UKG has an enormous amount of data to back that up, which is really interesting. The interesting thing about health and safety for me is, as a New Yorker, a large portion of the deaths were occurring in underserved neighborhoods where there was multi-generational families, and you've got 3 generations under one roof, and the 22-year-old is going to work or is going to school, and they're coming back, and so I think those healthcare concerns from where I'm from really hit home, because we saw the death and we saw the incredible sickness and the full hospitals in the multi-generational neighborhoods where you went to Midtown Manhattan into very higher income areas, and frankly they didn't have those stresses.
Yes.
Which was
I think it's a very important point. This pandemic has hit underserved communities, minority communities, much more impactfully than it has wealthier communities. And I think this is a big part of the reason, right? Those healthcare concerns are absolutely real. And that's a big determinant in whether deciding whether to take a new job or not.
So the 6th, I believe, of September is when the federal benefits ended. And magically, everybody didn't come back to work. And the back to school piece, we said, this might move the needle, but I think that there is still a big concern with Delta about we're all putting on face masks, we've got a serious outbreak going on still, so we're not just going to roll into school and I can go worry-free off to work at the distribution center or the call center or wherever, the hospital, right?
So that's the unfortunate thing. Earlier in the summer, it was all lining up. All 3 of those things were looking like they were heading towards a known date where the concerns would clear up, and Delta enters the mix, and it adds all kinds of uncertainty. And now all of a sudden we're faced with really not a lot of accelerants to people returning to work. However, if we can get Delta under control, all of a sudden there's all these other indicators of a really strong economy strong job demand out there, right? This is not a demand problem, it's a supply problem. Really the healthcare concerns are the main thing holding people back at this point. So if we can get that under control, all of a sudden it frees up, and I think we are going to be in for a surge of new jobs created.
So you said three things. So one is the healthcare concerns.
Mm-hmm.
One is demand for people to go to work,
Mm-hmm.
right? What's the third one?
The three things were that were holding people back. And all of the other downturns like this in the past, it's always been a demand issue. The jobs just aren't there. So there's plenty of people looking for jobs. The jobs just aren't there. This is the opposite, right? It's a supply issue. The jobs are there, and I think we've touched on this in the past, where there's more jobs available than there are people looking for them right now, right? This hasn't happened in decades.
So there's about 10 million jobs open in the U.S. right now. We never get the number exactly right.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, it's hard to collect all the data, but it's about 10 million. We've got more jobs than people actively seeking work. Okay, so that brings me to the next kind of chapter of this conversation with you, which is the jobs report.
Yep.
And depending on what news outlet you're watching, it sounds to me like, the job creation is what they talk about. They say, listen, we only had 200,000 jobs created in this period. What does that really mean? And can you talk to me about what you predicted, and did it come true?
Sure. Yeah, so this was a fascinating jobs report. In the month of August, I was looking at it as all the economists out there were thinking about the August jobs report as the Beatles job report. Stay with me here.
Exactly.
Right, because they were looking at the data and saying, imagine all the people. Right? It didn't happen.
This is why I don't sing, by the way. I'm out of musicals.
I don't either. But no, they were feeling like there's all these people that are coming back to work. Everything is great. I was looking at the data and saying, they're not working.
Yeah.
Right? So that was the benefit of this high-frequency data that we've got, where we're able to track who's actually working as of yesterday. And we saw that all throughout the month of August, people were taking vacations. Good news. People were just not coming back to work to the same degree that we were seeing in July. July wasn't quite as good as June. June wasn't quite as good as May. I think we've seen a gradual degradation until it really kind of fell off a cliff in August. The caveat there is...
So things weren't getting better.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right, yeah. The caveat there is things always fall off a cliff in August.
Right.
People are always taking vacation. More vacation built up this year in August, so we said, okay, well, if the Bureau of Labor Statistics has taken their monthly survey in mid-August, they're probably catching a lot of people that are either between jobs and don't want to start till after Labor Day, or they're in the middle of vacation, and so their response rates are lower. The data is suggesting that people are not working to the degree that economists are expecting.
What was their forecast?
Their forecast was for just over 600,000 jobs created in the month of August, and we came in at right around 200,000. And that's about where our data was suggesting we would land.
So you folks were in the range,
Yeah.
and they were off by about, what is that, 300%?
Right, something like that, yeah.
So it was a shock to a lot of people,
Yeah.
but it wasn't a shock to you. And I think that's the interesting piece about being this close to the workforce, right?
Yeah.
Is you have a totally different set of insights on it, which is interesting. So the jobs report is not about, how many jobs we created.
Correct.
And
Correct.
it's about how many people entered the workforce.
Yeah, and so in a lot of downturns previously, it is about new jobs being created, right? It's
Because
jobs
if they're
that
not
didn't
available,
exist.
we can't do it, right?
That's right. Yeah. But
Not in this
that's
case.
again the difference between the demand issue and the supply issue. In this case, the jobs are out there, so they're not being magically created. It's are people willing to take them, and it's a high bar these days from an employer standpoint
Yep.
to actually entice people back. They're having to offer a lot more flexibility in terms of schedule. They're having to offer things like daily pay, which is a big topic. It'll be interesting to see that play out. And then, of course, I think every main street we drive down these days, you see at the exact starting hourly rate at most restaurants out there, and they're just going higher and higher and higher just to try to attract.
And I want to talk about that sort of towards the end of this, because the whole going higher and higher thing sounds great for employees, but it's kind of a short-term good news, long-term bad news maybe for them. Yep. The politics, though, comes into play on a range of these topics, including if there's 10 million jobs, why are we giving people benefits at all? Mm-hmm. And your point, and I think it's a good one, is we have real pandemic healthcare concerns.
Yeah.
The fight should not be about whether there were jobs available or not, but it should be about, is it safe to do these jobs? Does the American public feel comfortable doing these jobs, and can they, considering we also want them to take care of their children?
Yeah, is it safe to do these jobs? I think there's an employer responsibility there, but are you also creating an environment that employees are proud to work in? They get excited to come to work every day. The bar is higher than it's ever been for employers to entice people back to work. I think one of the underreported statistics coming out of the pandemic is the number of retirements over the past 18 months has dwarfed any other period over the last 30 or 40 years.
So we're losing skills, experience,
yes, and
all
it's
of it.
all our most experienced workers that are just deciding, you know what, I was going to retire in the next few years anyway. It just accelerated all of that, and all of a sudden, that's why we've got 10 million. That's one reason we've got 10 million jobs available, and not enough people to fill those jobs. It's going to be a tough one to come out of, but I think having employers that are supportive of thinking differently about benefits, having employers that are willing to do the training is going to be a big improvement.
So I was given a hard time about a range of things last time. We did this. The hard time I was given the most about was the fact that we told them what the problem was and we didn't give them all the solutions. So we said, like, the world's ending.
See, I thought the thing...
We gave them some, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I thought the thing you were given the hardest time about was your socks.
That's true.
And that's why, in a show of solidarity today, we're both wearing UKG socks.
UKG socks. Listen, Ankara, I need socks. Just for marketing, send me socks. That was actually number one in some of the outlets where we sent the video. But number one academically and intellectually was, you told me that we're not having as many kids as we used to. We're not getting married at the same rate. We've got higher household net worth. People are expecting different things. The benefits are changing forever for these people in a great way for employees, in an expensive way for employers, all this stuff. So what are we supposed to do about it? And we talked about a couple things. We talked about decision rights, and we talked about decision rights and access to information. If we give them more access to information and we give them the ability to make an impact every day, they're more likely to stay. Yep. Which I think is really important, but they said, give me more, that's not enough. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things that my clients are obsessed with, and what some of them are doing about it that I have never seen before. So number one is shift schedules. And I've been talking about shift schedules for 25 years, and so I don't think it's as exciting as I used to. But Chris Todd, your president, said to me one time, I was giving a speech with him in Toronto, and he said, all those other stories were funny, but that last 5 minutes on shift schedules, that was the most interesting thing you did. And I was like, really? He goes, yes, spend more time on that. Yeah. So shift schedules are interesting because it directly correlates to the quality of life of the employee. How much time am I going to spend at work, outside of work? Am I going to work an 8-hour shift or a 12-hour shift, which will determine how many days off I get and how many weekends off I get. And the employers that we work with traditionally say, we can have 1 or 2 shift schedules and that's it. It's too hard to manage. Yep. And so we have developed shift schedules for them where employees get an extra 87 days off a year. They get 17 6-day weekends built into their schedule every year. Yeah. And those are exciting things for them in their 20s and 30s. There's an older generation that doesn't say they can't do the 12-hour shift. They just don't want to change anything that they've done before. And they say, this is an 8-hour shift, this is all we have. What's interesting about the older generations also is they're also saying, we suffered through this and they should too. It's like a hazing ritual. Yeah, sure. And they say, if I worked 70 hours a week when I started here and I never got a weekend off, you're going to have to do the same thing. And it's, well, we have these better ways to do things now. I don't care. Yeah. And they use terms like crybaby a lot, which is not helpful to the culture. But shift schedules, our most innovative clients are accepting a range of shift schedules, not 20 or 30 of them, whether you're in a services, healthcare, manufacturing, call center, whatever environment you're in. They're saying we can take a handful of these things, and with the right technology, we can manage it, which means not only are the employees winning, but we're better able to meet customer demand and retain more employees. So that's one piece of the story. The second one for us is overtime. And we have a younger group of people that are saying, I don't want any overtime at all. How much money do I really need? Versus an older generation that's either near retirement or has built their whole life around a 70-hour work week. Right. You know, and so we're seeing those two things as big trends. There's others, but I just wanted you to maybe talk to us a little bit about those too as well, because managing those things are complicated.
They're very complicated. They're fantastic examples, and I think they're really on the cutting edge of where workforce management, workforce strategy is heading.
It's not enough to just do the perfect paycheck anymore.
That's right.
Like, hey, we followed the law.
Right.
And it's like, congratulations.
Right.
Forget it.
Yeah. That look. I think what you described of how the older generation is reacting. That's back to the cranky old neighbor, right? It's like,
for my clients out there, I didn't say cranky old neighbor, but he's right. And it's
But in reality, it's the same generation that's desperately hoping that their kids have a better life than they had, and that their grandkids have a better life than their kids had. Like, it's the same generation that could not be more supportive of their kids and of advancement. They just don't want to change their approach, their process, because frankly, it's worked for them, right? It's the greatest generation. It's also the most successful generation in a long time.
We said last time it's 1.2 million in average household net worth. Mm-hmm. So maybe whether it's one adult or two adults in the house, it's 1.2 million per household, and that's not a huge amount of money, but it's more than any other generation has ever had.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. So I think what's going to be interesting is if you look back over the past 100 years or so, every generation has complained about the crazy ideas from the next generation,
Right.
And those ideas have always ended up becoming the mainstream.
That's right.
Right. So
they propel us forward.
That's right. Yeah. So I think where that younger generation of workers is pushing their employers is exactly where we'll be over the next few years. So I think some of the innovations that you're talking about around shift schedules and thinking more creatively about overtime, not just assuming that, of course, people are wanting to take it because they're going to get paid a lot more. I think those are all good things, and I think they're going to stick. Post-pandemic, they have to stick. That's going to be the future. And that's where I mentioned a couple times, thinking very differently about benefits, thinking very differently about flexibility. I think the reality is the expectations for the last couple generations have been, I want to make more and more money as I advance further in my career. This generation seems to be, I want to be more proud of the company that I'm working for. I want to have more flexibility, and I want to make some more money as I advance further in my career. That's a very different thing to approach for an employer.
Yeah, totally different. So I'm hoping that and we're not ending this, but I'm hoping when we do the next video, it's about ESG. Yeah. And I want to touch on it now, and then I want you to talk to me about what you think from a technology perspective around how that all fits in. And again, it comes down to this whole story of 10 years ago it was about the perfect paycheck, right? Like if we just follow the laws, we're winning.
Yeah.
Now there's a bigger, broader story around, and ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. So there's three key pillars of that story. On the environmental side, if you're a trucking company, are you polluting by driving trucks all over the country? You know, and just because you're following the laws, social activists can shut down your business. They can shine a light on what you're doing, and nobody is safe. You know, if you're, and I'm not going to mention any logos, especially for a company that has such a huge customer base, but if you're in oil and gas, there could be an issue there. Distribution, retail, manufacturing, call centers, healthcare, even pharma businesses, they're all at risk. So what I have found interesting is how some of my clients are addressing this story. One that may end up being counterproductive, and that is what you've talked about a lot, and I think it's important, is better pay and benefits for the employee. Now, last time we talked about the range of companies in Allentown, Pennsylvania that are getting $25 an hour, no experience, no college education, full benefits, the whole thing. But is there a place where we go too far? And I'm talking about automation. So our economy traditionally has been cyclical. I don't think that's going to change. So if that's the case, and we have a downturn, and we've increased the pay and benefits of all of these employees, when you look at the arbitrage between automation and the cost of hourly workers, yes, in a downturn, you can't fire equipment. You've paid for it. So that's one watch out. But is there a point where employees become so expensive and they're in short supply, and by the way, they get sick and call off and have all these other requirements? We have to train them. Right. So what's the arbitrage? So what do you think about that?
Yeah. So I've been calling this the toothpaste problem. Right? Once you squeeze that tube, you can't put the toothpaste back in. So once you increase base pay to $17 an hour, $20 an hour, $25 an hour, 2 years from now, you're not going to take that back to 20, right?
It goes one way.
That's right. It only goes
just
one way.
Just like the toothpaste.
That's right. Yeah, that's why it's a toothpaste problem. Right?
It is.
You can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. I think it's the same here. You mentioned that with automation, you can't fire a machine. However, you can shut the machine off, which saves all the incremental operating costs going forward. And I think that's a critical lever of flexibility that are going to be pretty important to manufacturers in particular going forward. So actually, like, I go back to just a really simple framework that we've been using for years in terms of how to think about allocating effort, allocating investment dollars, people, process, technology.
Yeah.
Right? Those are the three things that are going to, and kind of balancing between those three things are what's going to see this forward. If you can afford to pay people a lot more, if you're a lot better on your processes, so which means you end up having fewer jobs out there, that's the counterbalance.
You got to take cost out of somewhere to
pay
allocate it somewhere.
Yeah. And I think we've got more access to data now than we've ever had before to be able to know where to hone in on the process, where automation can help. Robotic process automation right now, I think we're in inning one of a very long game of having an impact on business. It's going to be interesting. So I wouldn't be surprised if workers get what they want. If part of what they want is higher pay, I don't think that's all that they want, but if it's part of it, I think they're going to get that. But I think long term, it is going to mean that there's going to be fewer jobs out there.
Yeah, and two things on that. One is I go back to the United Steelworkers and the history there, and they were so good at negotiating contracts and wages they put themselves out of work.
Yeah.
And there's more than just that as a factor, but that was a very big factor. And secondly, on the data piece, the richest man in Japan was just announced this week, and it's the guy that owns the company that they manufacture the sensors to collect the data.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so they are able to collect data on, unlimited activity.
Yep.
And because of that and the demand for that kind of thing, he's the richest man in Japan.
Right.
Which I thought was a cool thing.
That is interesting.
Yeah, it's whoever owns the data, and is able to translate it into useful information.
Right.
Wins.
Right.
All right. So UKG does a really good job around governance. They've got it figured out. We can actually follow the state, local, federal, international, whatever laws. That works.
Yeah.
But and I'm going back to Chris Todd again, mostly so I can gain his favor. But he recently was quoted about how we have to do more. We can't just be the perfect paycheck, follow the laws. We're going to do those things. That's number one. But on the social piece, if you're looking at ESG, we've got governance figured out. On the social side, we've got to culturally fit in to those companies. And before I ask you to talk about that, we have clients today, and you probably want to jump in on this too, that are firing customers. And they're saying, we have our employees working 65, 70 hours a week. It's not okay anymore. Some of them want it, and we'll keep those employees on high overtime because it's something that they built their lives around. But a larger and larger population doesn't want it, and we can either do a bad job for our customers and destroy the company culture, or we've got to fire customers and reduce revenue, which is an apocalyptic story in manufacturing, mining, distribution, utilities, call centers. In healthcare, it happens all the time. We don't really talk about it. I mean, but so that's on the social side. But firing customers, and I don't want to make this a UKG story, but you folks are really on top of this.
It's something we do spend a lot of time on. So just in the business that I was helping to run, I recently fired one of my customers, and one of my favorite business books is called "The Customer Comes Second." Right? It's because the employees always come first. They're the ones serving their customers. So if you are going to be a customer-focused organization, a truly customer-oriented organization, you have to be an employee-first organization.
That's what Southwest Airlines says.
That's
if
right.
we put our employees first,
that's right.
They will take better care of the customers.
Yes. So what I realized was that when a customer comes up, regardless of how big they are, if they're being abusive, if they're being impossible to work with, if they're being just completely unreasonable and really not willing to work with you, you're going to teach your employees a lesson regardless of how you react, right? If you don't hold the customer accountable, that's teaching the employees that kind of behavior is okay, and you're not going to prioritize them. If you do hold the customer accountable, that's teaching the employees that, you know what, we take our rhetoric very seriously, and we are going to prioritize you and your well-being. And in this particular case, it was one of this particular business's larger customers, and I had no bones about saying, you know what, we've had this conversation in the past. You cannot treat our employees this way. That's not acceptable. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to find a way for you to work with another vendor.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, I got some great feedback. I got some pushback from the customer, but when I walked through the specific examples, he admitted to all of it.
Yeah.
And he said, look, I disagree with it, but this is the decision. We'll move forward. The response among employees was huge.
Thank you for saving me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you know what? If it's a situation where the employees just don't want to put into the work, that's one thing. That was not the case here. In some cases, you're going to bang your head against a wall trying to serve a customer that their model is just not going to match up with your model. They're going to be better served if you let them go, obviously in a professional way, and you're going to be better served if you let them go. That's a hard decision to make, but it is critical. I think it can be seen as controversial to fire customers, but it's critical, actually for both sides, for the customers and for you, to cause both sides less frustration.
So, before we wrap up, I think that's interesting. Our customers are doing that, but our customers are also firing great customers of theirs, and the reason is they literally don't have the bandwidth, and the option is they're doing both.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
but I cannot have my employees work 70 hours a week anymore, even for great customers.
Right.
And so there's this sort of death spiral culturally of I can't do this anymore, I'm leaving, and then they're short-staffed, and then it puts more stress on the great employees, so then they can't do it. Yeah. So there's two thoughts here, and I think a lot of this is it should have happened before the pandemic, right? When we didn't have enough employees and we were stressing everybody out before.
Yeah.
But firing bad customers is always a good idea. That's number one. Number two is if you put your customer ahead of your employee and you do it in an acute way, your employee is going to leave and then you won't be able to take care of your customers anyway.
That's right.
And it's that foresight that's really important. So in closing, there's a lot of things that have changed because of the pandemic. There were things that were problems before the pandemic as well.
Yeah.
And the tipping point on things like putting your employees first, even companies with terrible cultures are making decisions to put the employees first, not because they love their employees, but because they know that that's the only way to service their customers.
Right.
But great companies are getting ahead of it and doing it before it's a crisis.
Absolutely.
And it's not good enough to just follow the governance rules.
Yeah.
And ESG, environmental, of course, is important. We'll get to that in our next session. But the social piece of this is really king now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you don't do those things, you're not going to be shut down by a government, but social activism is going to knock you out. And so this is an important message for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so there's this concept of the double bottom line that people have been talking about for 15 years or so, but it's really just in the last couple of years that employees are coming up and just expecting that you have a double bottom line. One bottom line is financial, but another bottom line is what's your impact in society? And I don't think that's going away either. Again, the next generation is always going to lead, and that's kind of where we're headed in the future. This is something that's clearly very important to that generation. They want to be proud of the company that they work for, and I think that's going to be a lasting impact of this pandemic.
And the SEC is talking about mandating this for all public companies, that they have to show the other line, which is crazy. So I want to thank you for the time again. I can't wait to hear what happens next month. And let's see, everybody's back to work, and we're at a 3% unemployment. Very exciting. That's not a prediction,
right?
But Dave, thank you so much, and thanks to UKG for hosting us again.
Absolutely. No suits, no slides. We'll see you next time.
But lots of socks.
That's right.